Welcome back to Stylized Station, a platform dedicated to sharing free knowledge with the digital art community. Today, we're going to learn how to create this beautiful Hobbit Mansion scene and learn about composition, stylized shaders in Unreal Engine, how to make fluffy foliage, and some stylized texturing. Speaking of texturing, if you want to learn how to master stylized texturing using Substance Painter, feel free to join our latest course, where you'll learn how to create beautiful stylized textures from scratch, including anime and Studio Ghibli style textures. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to consider getting the course. Now let's get into the video.
Hello everyone, my name is Johannes Burström, and today I'm gonna do a breakdown of how I created this Hobbit Mansion. I'm gonna talk about how I created the fluffy foliage, the grass, the others like shaders, the fog shaders, and also some general advice regarding composition and how to think when it comes to tutorials. So I hope that sounds interesting to you. Yeah, have a nice watch. So the first thing that I thought when doing this piece was to try to improve from my previous pieces. And in this one, I had a lot of feedback I got that was regarding the contrasts. Some parts are very bright, some parts are very dark. It's very cluttered everywhere. You don't know where to look. I didn't really capture the point of interest here in the middle. It's very hard to look at. To avoid that, this time I got the advice from someone who I can't remember to play with the levels on a grayscale image. And if everything is fading pretty evenly here in the end, like you can see the foam here isn't, but I'm okay with that. Then it's pretty well balanced. So that's one advice. And then I looked at Jasmine's piece with the birdhouse, where she had a lot of points of interest that was interesting to look at inside the image. You always find new stuff. So I tried to do something similar here where I added some elements all around the place. So it's not just one part that is interesting, it's more of the entire scene that is interesting, and the viewer can look around for a while and doesn't click next straight away. And to keep the viewer, like the focus to the house, I added some guiding lines here. I'm not sure if they actually do anything. Very hard to measure, I think. But yeah, they're there. They were also added due to feedback. So ask for feedback, everyone. That's super important if you want to improve. And then I also had in mind, like, all of these things I'm talking about here, I'm not sure how much they improve the piece or if they do anything at all, but I thought it's interesting to try to play around with. So I also had this rule of thirds in mind, that I tried to keep some balance here, where you can see like this part is kind of balanced with this part with some point of interest. This part is very empty with just some tree crowns, exactly like this one, treetops. Same here, just some foreground and grass, just like this one, and we have the centerpiece here. So that's I had that in mind. Like I said earlier, I don't know how much it does, but I think it does. Another thing is that I try to have some kind of a gradients, both horizontally and vertically. I could have probably pushed that a bit more. Looking back at it, it's probably something I will bring into my next piece. But so I tried to have some orange to blue gradient on the horizontal and green to yellow green. But yeah, it's not super visible, but I tried. Also, a feedback advice I got from some Discord community was it was Experience Point, I think. I got advice to push foreground and also have some fog in the background to divide it from the middle part here. And that really improved the piece a lot. So that's something I would advise everyone to look at. Yeah, so that's about it for the composition, and now we're gonna head into Unreal to check the overall breakdown. All right, so in general, if we're supposed to break this down into pieces so that people know how it's built up, I'm using distance fields for some ambient occlusion and also the water, and I'm using runtime virtual textures, which gives you this gradient that you can see on these ones, for example, and also the grass uses that. And I'm using trim sheets for the wood parts. All of the wood parts are basically from a trim sheet. I have been sculpting some separate pieces like the chimney here, the sign. Yeah. And the trees are built with, I just have a huge stem here, and then I have some individual branches that I can move around, and yeah. For the grass, I have, you can see there's some variation in the grass. I have these taller ones, I have different grass. This is one alpha, this is another alpha, so that I could add some variation to it. I think that's pretty unique, and I don't see that utilized a lot. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward how it's built up. I whiteboxed everything in Maya first until the house was done, and then I started to build the environment around it once the house was in place. So the shaders are, some shaders are pretty advanced in here. I have a master material here that is using height lerp with the vertex painting. There's a lot of tutorials on vertex painting with height lerps. It's basically just vertex painting, but you also add a blending texture. And I have a pretty high contrast, because otherwise, if we look at here, if I reduce the contrast, we get this a bit blurry. I didn't like that, especially when you're looking at it from afar. It's more nice to have a cleaner edge. So that's something I had in mind when doing that. And we have this smoke is very improvised. I would probably have done it, I could have done it just as well with Niagara, but I had an idea that I just wanted to try to do it with a mesh. So this is just a mesh with some displacement that has a gradient from bottom up as an alpha, so that it doesn't displace the smoke here at the bottom, and you just displace at the top. Same with the color, it's a bit wider here at the top. Some contrast, some Fresnel here on the edges, so that we have a smooth transition. Yeah, and then it's basically just this texture here that is panning upwards with displacement attached to it, so that where it's white it displaces, where it's black it stays. So we can control the tessellation here. If I turn that to 0, you will see it's just a mesh now. And then when I add the tessellation, it starts to, yeah, you can see, go out. I think that was pretty cool. It was a fun way of doing it. I'm not sure if it's the most efficient way, but yeah, it did the trick. And then we have, I guess we can look at the fog cards. Pretty basic fog cards with a panner connected to the same smoke texture that the chimney had, or the chimney smoke had, with a depth fade to create the depth, and the linear gradient that also, like, this basically creates a sphere mask so that we don't see the edges on the plane. It fades out here. So if I would bring up the intensity, we would see that it has zero opacity here on the edges, which is pretty neat for a fog card. I didn't add, usually on fog cards you would add so that it fades when the camera gets close, so that you don't have this clipping here. But since this wasn't for a game, even though the assets are game ready, it's yeah, it was meant for just having this camera angle here. So I'm never going through the fog cards. Alright, so this is the grass material, and the most interesting part about this, I would guess, is the, you can see these, you don't really see it now, I can add some strength to it. You can see these faked shadows here. It's basically just normals, but it really looks like a subtle wind in addition to the actual world position offset on the grass. But I usually think that the simple grass wind doesn't do the trick by itself. You need something additional to it. So yeah, the way I did that was by looking at Lucen's grass tutorial. But then, of course, I made some tweaks to it myself, because it was like I said on the water material. I usually just go around, find different things that I like about other people's work and try to make it my own. Same with like this concept as well. Like, it's not my concept from the start. I linked in the art station the concept I was working from, but then you make it your own. So he explains the math behind it and how it works. But basically what you do is that you have these normal maps panning, blending together with the normals pointing upwards. That creates this effect, and these are pretty, like, you can scale them pretty largely. So I would suggest you looking at his tutorial, how it actually works. But yeah, because that's in Unreal as well. Another thing I did was to something else I did here was to add this lower grass, what should we call it, function, or part perhaps, that I got from PrismaticaDev, that has some amazing YouTube tutorials as well, so check him out. What this does is basically takes the R, it masks the R from the runtime virtual texture sample. So when there's red in the color on the ground, it lowers the grass. So red is in dirt, or so we can see here, for example, it's lowering the grass where it's getting closer to the dirt, so that it has a pretty neat transition, so it's not as sharp, which I think works great. And then I'm plugging that part into the simple grass wind. These two wind sizes are just, I went into the function here, loosen does this as well, and it's a very good advice to add this so you have some further control over the simple grass wind. Usually it's like 1024 here as a constant value and 512 or something here, but you can by adding the input function input and putting that as a scalar, you basically give it you create a new input here that we're plugging into the world position offset. Another thing I couldn't do was to usually you would create a gradient top down for grass because to avoid it swaying, so you would just add like a no, not that, you would add a linear gradient there and then take it as V so that it doesn't wobble on the bottom of the grass, just at the top. But as we have here like a bunch of different vegetation here, we can't really just use a gradient. So what I had to do is to vertex paint the grass inside of Maya before exporting it to Unreal, so that each individual mesh, if we go into, let's say, this grass here, and we put on the vertex colors, you can see it already has like applied red down here and black up here. So I did that instead of having the usual gradient that you would use when masking out when masking it out. So it's basically this instead of having this. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's super interesting other than that. It's most of this is covered within Lucen's tutorial, I think, so I don't need to go through that. Go check his workout. Okay, so when creating these fluffy trees that Pontus Karlsson came up with, we have to go into ZBrush first. You can do it in Maya or Blender as well. Pontus Karlsson covers it a bit more extensively. So if you want to find out how to do it in Maya, you can, or Blender or whatever, you can check his tutorial here. I'm gonna go through how to do it very simple in ZBrush because I found that the way you do it there is super easy to iterate on. So let's say I have this blob here. However you want to do it, you can just sculpt something very sloppy with the silhouette that you want. And when you're done with the sculpt, you simply go into geometry, zero measure, drag down the adaptive size, drag down the curve strength. You put the target poly count pretty low. It depends on how large the treetop is. You zero measure. Now we will get this rather low poly top. And then we're gonna UV map it inside of ZBrush and export it to Unreal. So we have it now. It looks decent. You might have to do some going back and forth to find the correct density of the faces because you want it to be pretty evenly between all your trees. You don't want some trees to have super small faces and some to have very low poly. So now we go into UV map, we hit UV tile. Alright, to explain what happens when you click the UV tile, I brought up this example here. So what UV tile in ZBrush does is basically the same as this Unitize does in Maya. It makes all the faces cover the entire UV tile. So when you're billboarding, they will each have the texture that you apply to it. In our case, the small leaves. They will each have the same texture, and then they billboard and create that awesome effect, and you're done basically. You export this into Unreal, and since I already have it here, I won't do that. I'm just gonna pull it out there. So that's it basically. And then when you are applying the material, boom, I have distance field on, so it's a bit weird. And now if we go into the material instance, we can make it fluffy. Yep. Now you see why you want things to be pretty evenly, because yeah, if they have the same instance on, you want it to be evenly distributed. But I have one instance for the trees and one for the bushes here on the house. So if we go into the material, I'm not gonna cover this part here. Pontus Carlson does that in his tutorial, and this is basically just how to do it in Unreal. There's an image on his under his description of this part here, so that you can look at and replicate. This is just how to billboard in Unreal. I don't really use this part here. Yeah. So then we have the coloring here, and what's cool is that by using this technique, even though it's billboarding, the normals are kept from the original mesh. So the normals, they're using the normals from this one, even though it's billboarding. So that means we can use the vertex normals to calculate what colors to use where, so that we can have just the normals to say we want brighter colors where the normals are pointing upwards, and we want darker colors where the normals are pointing downwards. And then I also added vertex painting, which I don't ended up using, but yeah, you can do that as well. Just plug it into the alpha on lerp. We have highlights here that I didn't end up using. I will show you how that works, but it's pretty cool. And then this part here, the billboarding part, is plugged into the additional VPO on the simple grass wind, so that we can have wind in addition to the billboarding. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to recreate the cool wobble effect on his wind that Pontus Carlson did. So if someone does that, please share it. It would be super nice to have it inside of Unreal as well. Yes, so let's look at the material instance and how to use that. So like I said, the highlights on the emissive would look like that. You would probably have it very, very subtle. But I never ended up using it. But you can see it has some places where you could probably add it. Then you have the normal power, like how much the lower part of or the actually where the vertex are pointing downwards, how much it should differ from the top. Yeah. So for this part here, I just made a silhouette in ZBrush of the house. I actually imported the entire house into ZBrush, and then I drew with like spheres and such on top of the house, just all around the place where I thought moss could be added, and then I simply applied the the material to it. I zero meshed it same like I did with the tree, and that's basically it. Alright, that's it for me. I hope this was interesting to someone. If you want further information, you can message me on ArtStation. It should be linked below. Can also check out a game I'm working on together with some students in my school. It's a relaxing nature game, so if that sounds like something for you, you can join our Discord and check it out. Alright, take care everyone.